5,790 is within the 5,415, 6,618 budget. Here's the final humanized script. A federal judge has sentenced the leader of a Colombian money laundering organization to 5 years in federal prison. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the sentence closes out a case built on tracing how drug trafficking proceeds moved through the American financial system. There's no raid or chase here, just paper trails, wire transfers, shell transactions, cash deposits that look ordinary on their own, but together tell investigators exactly where the drug money came from and where it went. How do federal agents actually follow money that's designed to look clean? And what does a 5-year sentence say about how the justice system weighs financial crimes tied to narcotics trafficking? According to the Justice Department's announcement, the defendant led an organization responsible for laundering proceeds generated by narcotics trafficking. Prosecutors say the organization moved that money through the U.S. financial system on behalf of traffickers, acting as the financial arm of a drug distribution operation without ever touching the drugs themselves. Federal investigators built the case by tracking the flow of illicit funds across borders, according to the DOJ. That work typically involves financial institutions flagging suspicious transaction patterns, followed by federal agencies, often the DEA, IRS criminal investigation, and Homeland Security investigations, cross-referencing those patterns against known trafficking networks. It's slow, unglamorous work. There's no single dramatic breakthrough described in the public record, just the accumulation of financial evidence over time. Money laundering gets thrown around loosely as a term, so it's worth being precise about what it means legally. Money laundering is the process of disguising the origin of funds obtained through illegal activity, so they can be used or invested without drawing law enforcement attention. Federal law criminalizes not just the underlying crime that generated the money, but the act of moving or concealing that money afterward. That's why someone can be charged and sentenced specifically for laundering, separate from a drug trafficking charge itself. According to the source reporting, the defendant was sentenced under federal money laundering statutes to 5 years in prison. Under federal sentencing guidelines, a term like this typically reflects factors including the amount of money involved, the defendant's role in the organization, and whether the defendant cooperated with investigators or accepted responsibility. The public summary of this case doesn't specify a dollar figure, so we won't invent one. But the sentence itself signals that this was treated as a significant organization-leading role rather than a peripheral one. 5 years is a real prison term, but it's also on the lower end of what federal money laundering statutes allow, which can run into decades depending on the amount laundered and prior criminal history. That gap between what the law permits and what a judge actually imposes is where sentencing guidelines, plea agreements, and cooperation deals usually live. The public record here doesn't tell us whether this defendant cooperated or whether this was the result of a plea agreement rather than a trial. That's a real gap in what's publicly known, and we're not going to guess at it. To be clear, as reported, this is a case where a sentence has already been handed down, meaning this individual has been convicted, not merely accused. That distinction matters. Earlier in a case like this, before conviction, any named individual is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in court. At the sentencing stage, that presumption has already been resolved through the legal process, but it's still worth stating clearly because these cases often get conflated with earlier stage arrests and indictments where the presumption of innocence very much still applies. According to the Justice Department, the case concludes with this 5-year sentence for the organization's leader. What isn't yet public, at least not in the source material available here, is whether other members of the organization face separate charges, whether asset forfeiture was part of the sentence, or how much money moved through the network in total. Those are the open questions, and until DOJ or court filings make that information public, we're not going to fill in the blanks. What do you think? Does a 5-year sentence match the scale of harm caused by laundering drug trafficking proceeds through the financial system? Or does it feel light for someone described as leading the operation? If you want to verify any of this yourself, the primary source is the Justice Department's own press release archive, along with the FBI's National Press Release page and federal court records for the relevant district, which will eventually include the judgment and sentencing documents once they're filed. This case fits a broader pattern worth noting. Cases like this rarely start with the person at the top. They usually start with a single suspicious transaction, flagged by a bank's compliance department under anti-money laundering law that gets reported to the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. From there, it can take years for investigators to work backward from one flagged wire transfer to an entire organization, and even longer to build a case a prosecutor is confident taking to sentencing. None of that detail is confirmed for this specific case, since the source material doesn't go that deep. But it's the general shape almost every federal money laundering prosecution takes, and it's worth understanding as background for why cases like this can take years to reach a courtroom.